Here's another fun story. Let me tell you about the time I accidentally became the neighborhood cat guy. Yeah, it wasn't planned, and honestly, I'm not even a cat person. But here we are. It all started when I moved into my new apartment. It's a nice place, ground floor, big windows, pretty standard. The only problem? There's this cat that hangs around outside. A big, fluffy orange tabby with an attitude like it owns the block. The first time I saw it, it was just chilling on my windowsill, staring at me like I'd invaded its space. At first I ignored it. I mean, it's just a cat, right? But every time I opened the window or stepped outside, there it was, just watching, judging. One day I made the mistake of tossing it a piece of leftover chicken. That was my first error. The next morning it was back. Same spot, same judgmental look. This time it meowed, loudly, like it was demanding breakfast. So I gave it a little bit of tuna, thinking, okay, this will shut you up. Spoiler, it didn't. Fast forward a week, and now it's a routine. Every morning I wake up, open the door, and there's this cat, waiting like it's clocked in for its shift. At this point, I start calling it Garfield because, well, it's orange, and it eats like it's never been fed in its life. But here's where things get weird. One morning, I open my door, and Garfield isn't alone. There's another cat, a little black one with big green eyes, and they're both just sitting there staring at me like I'm the manager of some feline diner. So now I'm feeding 2 cats. By the end of the month, it's a whole crew. Garfield, the black cat who I named Shadow, and 2 others, a skinny gray one I call Smokey, and a scrappy little white one I dubbed Snowball. Every morning, they're lined up outside my door like they're waiting for brunch. It gets worse. One day, my neighbor sees me handing out cat food and says, "Oh, so you're the one feeding them. That's so sweet." Sweet? Lady, I'm being held hostage by a gang of stray cats. But before I can explain, she says, "You know, there's this orange tabby that hangs around my place too. Maybe you can feed him too?" And that's how I became the unofficial cat guy for the entire complex. People started leaving cans of cat food outside my door with little notes like, "For your furry friends." One lady even gave me a cat bed, which Garfield immediately claimed as his throne. Now, every time I step outside, I'm greeted by a parade of cats. They follow me to my car, they wait for me to come home, and one even tried to sneak into my apartment. I've given up trying to fight it. This is my life now. I'm the cat guy. Moral of the story? Never feed a stray cat, unless you're ready to become the leader of a feline fan club.
All right, so this is the story about the time I accidentally became a dog walker. Yeah, you heard that right. An actual professional dog walker. And no, it wasn't on purpose. It started on a Saturday morning. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, minding my own business, sipping a latte, and trying to look like one of those people who has their life together. Spoiler alert, I don't. Anyway, I noticed this guy at the table next to me looking super stressed. He's on the phone, talking way too loudly, saying things like, "I can't cancel again," and "No, it's not my fault," she called out. So naturally, I start eavesdropping. Turns out he owns a dog walking business, and one of his walkers bailed last minute. He's panicking because he has a packed schedule and no one to cover. At this point, I'm thinking, wow, rough day, man, and I go back to sipping my latte. But then he looks over at me and says, "Hey, do you like dogs?" And before I can even think, my brain-to-mouth filter fails and I blurt out, "I love dogs." Big mistake, huge. His eyes light up and he's like, "Great, can you help me out? It's just for a couple of hours. Super easy. I'll pay you." Now, a normal person would have said no. But me? I'm awkward. I don't know how to say no and I'm too curious for my own good. So I say, "Sure, why not?" The next thing I know, I'm holding a clipboard with a list of addresses and a bag of leashes. He gives me a quick rundown, hands me a pack of doggy bags and says, "You've got this." Then he's gone, leaving me standing there like, wait, what just happened? The first stop was fine. It was this tiny chihuahua named Peanut. Easy. I take Peanut for a quick walk around the block, and we're good. I'm thinking, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. Then came the second stop. That's where things started to go downhill. This one was a Great Dane named Zeus. Let me tell you, Zeus was the size of a small horse. The moment I clipped the leash to his collar, he took off like a rocket, dragging me behind him. I'm running down the street, holding on for dear life, looking like a scene from an old comedy movie. People are staring. Someone honks. It's chaos. By the time I get Zeus back to his house, I'm sweating, my shoes are covered in mud, and I'm questioning every life decision that led me to this moment. But the real disaster was the third stop. I go to pick up this little fluffy Pomeranian named Princess. Adorable, right? Well, as soon as I open the door, she bolts. Just takes off like she's been waiting her whole life for this moment of freedom. I'm chasing her through the neighborhood, yelling, "Princess, stop, come back!" And this tiny dog is just zooming around like she's in the Olympics. Eventually, she runs into someone's backyard, and I'm crawling through bushes trying to catch her. I finally grab her and realize I've got leaves in my hair, dirt on my jeans, and scratches on my arms. But hey, at least I caught her. By the time I finish the last walk, I'm completely exhausted. I go back to the coffee shop to return the leashes and the clipboard, and the guy looks at me and says, "Wow, you're a natural. Want to do this again next weekend?" I just stared at him. And then, for reasons I still don't understand, I said, "Sure, why not?" So, yeah, that's how I accidentally became a dog walker for 2 whole weekends before I finally realized I should probably stick to drinking lattes and eavesdropping. Moral of the story? Be careful what you agree to when someone asks, "Do you like dogs?" It might turn into an adventure you never expected.
Let me tell you about the time I tried to impress a girl and ended up getting chased by a goose. Spoiler, it didn't work. So I was at the park with my friend Jake, just hanging out, tossing a frisbee around, when I spotted her. She was sitting on a bench reading a book, and she was absolutely stunning. You know those moments where the world feels like it's in slow motion? Yeah, it was one of those. Jake noticed me staring and said, "Dude, just go talk to her." But I'm not exactly the smoothest guy around, so I was like, no way. Instead, I decided to play it cool and show off my incredible frisbee skills. I turned to Jake and said, "Throw it long." My plan was simple: catch the frisbee in a way that made me look athletic, confident, and, most importantly, not like an idiot. Jake, being the wingman he is, launched the frisbee as far as he could. Now, here's where things went wrong. I started running for the frisbee, full sprint, determined to make the catch of the century. But what I didn't see was the goose, this massive, angry-looking goose that was just chilling near the path. As I got closer, the goose stood up and flared its wings. I swear it looked at me like, "You've made a terrible mistake." But I was already committed, so I kept running. That was mistake number 2. The frisbee landed a few feet away, and as I bent down to grab it, the goose charged, full speed, hissing, wings flapping. It was like something out of a horror movie. I panicked and started running, but the goose was relentless. I could hear Jake laughing his head off in the background, which was super helpful. The girl on the bench, she put down her book and started watching the whole thing unfold. Great. Just great. At this point, I'm zigzagging through the park, trying to dodge this angry bird. People are staring, kids are pointing, and one guy even shouted, "Run, dude, run!" like I wasn't already trying. Eventually, I managed to dive behind a tree, and the goose finally lost interest. It strutted away like it had won some kind of battle, and honestly, it did. I was out of breath, covered in grass stains, and my pride was completely shattered. When I got back to Jake, he was practically on the ground, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. The girl on the bench? She smiled at me and said, "Nice moves," before going back to her book. So, yeah, not my finest moment, but hey, at least I made an impression, right? Moral of the story, if you ever see a goose, don't try to act cool. Just walk away. Geese don't care about your confidence, and they definitely don't care about your love life. So, this is the story of how I accidentally started a gym club for my apartment building. Let me explain. A couple of months ago, I decided it was time to get in shape. You know, new year, new me, all that stuff. My apartment building has a tiny gym in the basement, like 2 treadmills, a set of weights, and one of those ancient elliptical machines that creaks if you so much as look at it. Anyway, I figured it's free, so why not? I went down there one evening with a water bottle and a vague plan to do something. There was no one else around, so I put on some music and started fumbling my way through a workout. I'm talking light weights, a little jogging, and some questionable attempts at push-ups. Not exactly Instagram-worthy. About 20 minutes in, the elevator doors opened, and this guy walked in. He looked like he lived at the gym. Muscles for days, wearing one of those tank tops that's basically just strings. He gave me a nod and started lifting weights like it was no big deal. Meanwhile, I'm in the corner, trying not to pass out after jogging for 5 minutes. The next day, I went back around the same time and he was there again. We exchanged awkward nods and I went about my very unimpressive routine. A few days later, another person showed up, a woman with one of those yoga mats that looks way too clean to have ever been used. She asked, is it always this quiet down here? And I just said, yeah, usually. Word must have gotten out because by the end of the week, there were 6 of us crammed into this tiny basement gym. It was chaos. One guy was trying to do squats in the corner while another was hogging the only working treadmill. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and started blasting 2000s pop hits, and I'm pretty sure the guy with the yoga mat had no idea what was happening. At some point, someone jokingly said, we should start a group or something, and for reasons I still don't understand, I said, yeah, we could call it the Basement Warriors. It was meant to be a joke, but they loved it. Before I knew it, we had a group chat, a schedule, and even a logo that someone made in Canva. Now, every evening at 7 p.m., the Basement Warriors take over the gym. We've got a rotation for the treadmill, people share workout tips, and someone even brought resistance bands for everyone to use. It's like this weird, unofficial fitness club that somehow makes me feel like a team captain, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. The best part? I'm actually sticking to my workouts now. Turns out, peer pressure is a surprisingly good motivator. Who knew? Moral of the story? Sometimes trying to get in shape leads to way more than you bargained for. And if you ever hear about a gym club called the Basement Warriors, just know it all started with me, a water bottle and some very questionable push-ups.
Let me tell you about the time I got locked out of my apartment in nothing but my pajamas. It's a tale of bad luck, bad timing, and the kind of embarrassment you only see in rom-coms. But this time, I was the main character. It was a lazy Saturday morning. I just rolled out of bed, still half asleep, wearing my favourite pyjama shorts and an oversized hoodie that's seen better days. You know, the kind of outfit you wear when you're sure no one will see you. My hair was in a messy bun that leaned more toward messy than bun. But it was fine, I was just grabbing the mail. 2 seconds tops. I grabbed the stack of envelopes and headed back toward my door. That's when I heard it. The dreaded sound of my apartment door clicking shut behind me. My stomach dropped. I turned the handle, hoping for a miracle. But nope. Locked. Totally. Completely locked. I stood there in disbelief for a moment, barefoot and clutching my junk mail like it was a lifeline. My phone on the kitchen counter, right next to my keys. I was officially stranded in my hallway with no way in and no dignity to speak of. My building doesn't have a front desk on weekends, so calling for help wasn't an option. My only hope was to knock on my neighbour's door. Unfortunately, my neighbour is an older woman named Mrs. Thompson who loves to gossip. Great. When she opened the door, her eyes lit up like she'd just won the lottery. "Oh dear, locked out?" she said in that tone that's equal parts pity and delight. I nodded, trying to look as nonchalant as possible. "Happens to the best of us," she said, smirking. I forced a laugh and asked if I could borrow her phone to call a locksmith. She handed it over, but not before giving me the full rundown on how kids these days never remember their keys. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. Super helpful." The locksmith said it would be at least an hour before he could get there. An hour! In my pajamas! Mrs. Thompson kindly offered to let me wait in her apartment, but I'd rather sit in the hallway than spend an hour listening to her critique the entire building. So there I was, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the ceiling and wishing for a time machine, when my cute neighbour from down the hall walked by. You know the one. Tall, dark hair, smile that could melt glaciers. Yeah, him. He stopped and looked at me, clearly trying not to laugh. "Locked out?" he asked. I nodded, trying to play it cool, and said, "Yep, just testing out the hallway seating. 5 stars. Highly recommend." He chuckled, which was great, but then he walked away, which was less great. Not exactly the meet-cute I'd imagined. Finally, after what felt like forever, the locksmith arrived. He looked at me, grinned, and said, "Locked out in your PJs, huh?" Happens all the time. I just nodded because, honestly, what else could I say? At that point, I I just wanted back into my apartment. As soon as the door opened, I thanked him, rushed inside, and vowed never to leave my apartment without my keys again. I also bought one of those little key holders to hang by the door. It's shaped like a pineapple, because apparently I'm that person now. Moral of the story is check your pockets before stepping out, even if it's just for a second. And maybe, just maybe, upgrade your pajama game. You never know who you'll run into.
Here's a new one for you. Let me tell you about the time I tried to fix a leaky faucet and ended up flooding my kitchen. Spoiler, I am not a plumber, and I should never attempt to be one. So it started with this tiny drip. You know the kind. A quiet, rhythmic drip, drip, drip that feels like it's mocking you. I figured it was no big deal. I mean, how hard could it be to fix a faucet, right? I hopped on YouTube, watched a couple of tutorials, and thought, I've got this. All I needed was a wrench and some confidence. Problem is, I had a wrench. Confidence? Not so much. The first step seemed easy. Turn off the water supply. I found the valve under the sink and twisted it. Or at least I tried to twist it. The thing wouldn't budge. I pulled, pushed, and even tried hitting it lightly with the wrench, because clearly that's a professional technique. Finally, with a lot more force than I probably should have used, it turned. Victory. I moved on to the next step, unscrewing the faucet. This is where things got tricky. As soon as I loosened the first piece, a little bit of water dribbled out. No big deal, I thought. But then it turned into a full-blown stream. Within seconds, water was gushing out of the pipe like a fire hydrant. I panicked and tried to twist the valve back off, but it wouldn't move. It was stuck. Like, completely stuck. At this point, I was drenched. My kitchen was rapidly turning into a kiddie pool, and I was screaming, "Why is this happening?" into the void. I grabbed every towel I owned and threw them on the floor, but it was no use. The water was winning. My neighbor heard the commotion and knocked on my door. When I opened it, she just stood there, staring at the tiny river now flowing into the hallway. Need help?" she asked. I nodded like a drowning person clinging to a life raft. She called her brother, who's apparently some kind of DIY wizard. He showed up in 10 minutes, took one look at the situation, and said, "You forgot to turn off the main water line." Oh, the main water line. Right. You know, the thing every tutorial casually mentions, but somehow I'd completely ignored. He shut it off in 2 seconds, grabbed his toolbox, and fixed the faucet in like 5 minutes. Meanwhile, I stood there, soaked to the bone, holding a soggy towel and questioning every life choice that had led me to this moment. By the time it was over, my kitchen looked like a hurricane had passed through, and I was too embarrassed to even make eye contact with my neighbor or her brother. They were nice about it, though. "It happens to everyone," they said. "Sure. Everyone floods their kitchen on a random Tuesday. Moral of the story, if you ever think how hard can it be, the answer is harder than you think. And maybe just call a plumber. It's worth it."
So let me tell you about the day I accidentally became the neighborhood squirrel savior. I'm 28, live in an apartment, and consider myself a pretty chill guy. But that day, I learned I'm not as cool under pressure as I thought. It started like any other Tuesday. I was enjoying my morning coffee, scrolling through my phone, when I heard this weird noise outside. It sounded like a squeaky toy, but more. Desperate. I peek out the window and see my neighbor, Mrs. Hargrove. She's this sweet old lady who's always gardening or baking, standing in her yard, flailing her arms around like she's warding off a swarm of bees. Naturally, I had to go check it out. I step outside, still holding my coffee, and ask, "Everything okay, Mrs. Hargrove?" She turns to me, looking all flustered, and says, "Oh, thank goodness you're here. There's a squirrel stuck in my bird feeder." I'm thinking, well, that's not something you see every day. But sure enough, there's this little squirrel wedged halfway into the bird feeder, its tail sticking out like a fluffy flag. It's squirming and squeaking, clearly panicking, and honestly, same. Mrs. Hargrove says, "Can you help? It looks so uncomfortable." Now, at this point, I probably should have just said, "Sorry, I have no idea how to handle squirrels." But no. For some reason, my brain decides this is my moment to be a hero. So I say, "Yeah, sure, I've got this." Spoiler, I did not have this. She hands me a pair of gardening gloves, bright yellow, too small for my hands, and says, "Be careful, it might bite." Great, because nothing says relaxing morning like the risk of rabies. I put on the gloves, grab a broom she offers me, and approach the feeder like I'm defusing a bomb. The squirrel is freaking out. Its little legs are kicking, its tail is flapping, and I'm trying to stay calm, but inside I'm thinking, this is how it ends. Death by squirrel. I gently tap the feeder with the broom, hoping it'll just slide out, but nope. This thing is stuck like it's super glued. Mrs. Hargrove starts shouting helpful things like, be gentle and don't hurt it. Meanwhile, I'm sweating bullets, trying to unscrew the top of the feeder to free the poor guy. Finally, I get the top off and the squirrel wriggles free. But instead of running away, it jumps straight onto my head. Yep, my head. For a moment, we just freeze. Me, the squirrel, Mrs. Hargrove. I'm too scared to move, and the squirrel is probably thinking, what now? Then it scrambles down my back and takes off up a tree, leaving me standing there with dirt in my hair and birdseed all over my shirt. Mrs. Hargrove starts clapping, like full-on applause. She says, you're a hero. You saved him. I'm trying to play it cool, but inside I'm like, what just happened? Later that afternoon, Mrs. Hargrove shows up at my door with a plate of cookies. She says a little thank you for saving the day. And honestly, worth it. Free cookies make everything better. So yeah, that's how I became the accidental squirrel savior of the neighborhood. Moral of the story? If you ever get asked to rescue a squirrel, wear a helmet. Trust me on that one.
Okay, let me tell you about the time I accidentally crashed a wedding and didn't even realize it until halfway through. So, my friend Sarah sent me this super fancy wedding invitation. You know the kind. Big, over the top, with ribbons, flowers, and gold lettering. Honestly, it felt like I was being invited to a royal event. I skimmed the invite, thought, got it, downtown venue, and threw it in my bag. Classic me, right? No need to save the address, I'll remember it. Fast forward to the day of the wedding. I'm running late, because of course I am. I grab the invitation, quickly glance at the venue name and punch it into GPS. I'm speeding down the road thinking, wow, I am really nailing this adulting thing. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. I get to this gorgeous building, I mean absolutely stunning. Fairy lights everywhere, a red carpet, the works. There's a big sign that says, welcome to our forever. I think, wow, Sarah really outdid herself. This is Pinterest-level perfection. I walk in, drop my gift bag on the table, it's wrapped terribly, by the way, and head toward a seat near the back. Everything feels a little off, like I don't recognize anyone, but I figure, it's probably just the groom's side of the family. I wouldn't know them anyway. Then this super friendly woman in a bright red dress comes over, sits next to me and says, oh, you must be from the groom's side. And me, not wanting to be rude, just smile and say, yep, sure am. At this point, I'm in too deep. The ceremony starts. The music is beautiful. The groom walks in, looking all nervous but happy, and then the bride enters. She's stunning, glowing, but she's also not Sarah. At that moment, my soul leaves my body. I'm sitting there like, oh no, no, no. But what can I do? Stand up and shout, oops, wrong wedding. No, so I stay put and pretend I belong. The vows are so sweet, I actually start tearing up. I don't even know these people, but I'm crying like I'm in a Hallmark movie. When they kiss, I clap and cheer along with everyone else, just trying to blend in. Then comes the reception, and let me tell you, this was the fanciest reception I've ever seen. There's a live band, an open bar, and food that looks like it came from a Michelin-starred restaurant. I'm talking lobster tails, steak, the whole deal. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this isn't so bad after all. I sit at a table with a bunch of sweet older ladies. They're telling stories about the bride and groom, and I'm nodding along like, wow, that's so beautiful. At one point, someone asks me, how do you know the groom? And without missing a beat, I lie. I say, oh, we went to college together. Bio 101, apparently. Yep, I just made that up. The best part of the night? The cake. Oh my gosh. It was this massive, multi-tiered masterpiece covered in gold accents and edible flowers. I went back for seconds. No shame. When the dancing started, I figured it was my chance to slip out unnoticed. But before I could leave, this older man stops me and says, you better come to the family reunion next summer. It won't be the same without you. I just smiled and said, of course, wouldn't miss it. I finally get home and I'm still holding the party favour they gave me. I pull out Sarah's invite and realise her wedding was at a completely different venue. on the other side of town. I missed the whole thing. When I texted Sarah to explain, she thought it was hilarious. She said, "At least you got free cake." So, moral of the story, double check the address. Always. And hey, if you ever find yourself at a random wedding, just roll with it. You might end up with a great story and some really good cake.